The terror attacks in Tunisia, Egypt and Turkey have had a devastating effect on the country's tourism trade. The conflicts and political upheaval of the Arab Spring had already deterred many from taking that holiday by the southern Mediterranean. Images of the attacks at Istanbul airport and on a Russian holiday flight over the Sinai still linger in people's minds and are determining the holiday destinations of millions of Europeans. On this beach in Sousse, the terror attack that rocked Tunisia played out on June the 26th, 2015. The journalist Mabrouka Kadir was at the scene of the crime a few moments after it happened, in front of the Imperial Marhaba Hotel. She saw things she will never be able to forget.
On a trouvé la situation chaotique, des touristes par terre, tués, du sang qui coule et qui se mélange avec l'eau de la mer, qui se mélange avec l'eau du piscine. C'était vraiment des images très dures à voir.
On the beach and in the Imperial Marhaba Hotel, Saifeddina Yacoubi, a student, killed 38 guests, most of them British. He took aim and opened fire with a Kalashnikov. Sometime later, he was killed by the police. The hotel is still closed today. It was a terror attack that traumatized the country and its people like no other.
J'avais honte quand même. C'est pas ça ma Tunisie, c'est pas ça notre pays et c'est pas comme ça qu'on traite des touristes qui sont des invités chez nous. Et qu'on le traite comme ça, c'est quand même très, très pénible et très triste à le voir et à le vivre. C'était plus choquant, des victimes, du sang qui se mélange avec la mer, des gens qui pleurent, des touristes qui... C'est vraiment honteux de le vivre et c'est vraiment touchant de le vivre. Et j'espère que je le vivrai pas encore en Tunisie.
The terror attack of a single assassin trained by the IS in neighboring Libya cleared out the beaches of Tunisia in one go. Many hotels were forced to close. Madame Idris, owner of the Imperial Marhaba Hotel, let her employees go. She only survived the crisis because she also owned other hotels.
Je pense que ce jour-là, c'était réellement l'enfer. L'enfer à mon niveau à moi, au niveau de ma clientèle, au niveau du personnel et au niveau de toute la ville de Sousse et même de la Tunisie et au-delà de la Tunisie. Les terroristes ont voulu frapper l'économie du pays à travers le tourisme. Et vous savez qu'en Tunisie, le tourisme est l'un des piliers de l'économie. Et à part les gens qui travaillent, les 400 000 personnes qui travaillent dans le secteur du tourisme directement, il y en a presque autant qui travaillent d'une façon indirecte.
The consequences were even more dramatic in Djerba than in Sousse. Tourism collapses by 80%, a crash that affects every family on the island, as tourism is the most important source of income for the population. Thousands of employees were let go. Suad Aliani worked in a senior position at the hotel for 23 years. When it suddenly closed a few months ago, everyone was made redundant. There was no talk of any redundancy wage. The hotel owner disappeared abroad.
مش يتسكر عليه هو الابواب الكل ونبقى احنا نعانوا لنا منا مش معقول الكلام هذا ويخلوا العباد بالطريقه هذه وبعد تالي يقولوا هو ثم ارهاب هم يصنعوا في الارهاب هذول هذا الناس تصنع في الارهاب بكل صراحه معناه يلزم يحلوا المشكله في اسرع وقت راهو انا مدام جتني فرصه واني تكلمت وجاني اعلام وتكلمت راهو غيري يبات يبات يبكي ما عندوش حل يا مدام
Suad's husband, Saimi, also lost his job in the hotel and has to sell the family car. Many sell their cars as social and financial decline looms. Saimi Aliani has found a new job as a security worker, but his income is now much lower.
ولت عندنا أزمة مادية ولينا ما عندناش المرأة ما عادش نجم تسدد باش نجم أنا وحدي ما عادش نجم نسدد باش نخلص القروض نتاع المرأة. تلزينا باش نبيعوا الكربة باش نكملوا نسدوا القروض. كان ما نبيعوش الكربة ما نسدوش القروض خاطر البنوك ما ترحمناش. لازم نمشوا للقضاء ونمشوا للمحاكم وعلو مجر.
This time, selling the car wasn't possible. There are too many on offer. The low prices are ruining the market. Suad Aliani worries every day. Soon the family will not be able to meet their payments. 150 euros a month is all that remains for the family of 5. That is barely enough for food, let alone school books and uniforms for the children. She has asked the state for support, but received none.
أنا خالصة معنا وقت الاستحقية تبع 23 سنة تتنكرني تقول لي أخي المحكمة في بالك أنت سيدتي الكريمة راهو هو المحامي ما ياخذ القضية إلا ما تعطيه نسبة من المصاريف عاد المنفذ ما ياخذ لك حكم باش يمشي يعملوا إلا ما تعطيه فلوس إيه إحنا ناس بدون شهرية يا أخي أنا شهرية واحدة زيد نحي منها باش ندفع للمحامي وندفع لعد المنفذ ما نمشوا نمدوا يدينا ولا نمشوا نسرقوا ولا نمشوا نعملوا حاجات كمن هيك.
كان يبقى على النحو هذا يخوف مش كان أنا برك برشا عديد من الزملاء وعديد من أشخاص أخرين في السياحة الكل. احنا نتمنوا باش ما تزيدش الأزمة هذه تتطور برشا.
If the tourists continue to stay away from Djerba, poverty threatens to take hold of the island once more. On the market in Homtsuk, throngs of visitors used to jostle past the stalls. Tourists from Britain and Germany, in particular, were fond of vacationing in Djerba. Today, Lofty Cheyed and his tradesmen are waiting for customers in vain. He cannot live off the few local sales. It's only thanks to his savings that he can manage to keep his shop open.
نخدموا شوية مع توانسة وشوية جونة جزيرية ومن بعد بقية العام حاجة صغيرة مع أولاد البلاد لكن ما تفيش بالمصاريف ما تخلصش المصاريف اللي شارج اللي زامبو كلها ما نجموش نخلصوها. الوضعية هذه خلت برشا ناس هربت من القطاع هذايا برشا خدامة ما عادش تحب تخدم برشا ناس حرقت البرة مشات لأوروبا بدلت الخدمة كل حد وشنو اللي يعمل.
Lofty is still waiting for customers 8 hours later. Patiently, he advises them. He mourns the disappearance of Europeans who like to spend money. The visit to the bazaar was a popular activity for many of them.
Jetzt fertig die Arbeiter. Ich muss alle rein drinnen. Ja, vielleicht morgen besser.
It takes 2 hours to bring the goods inside. He works 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, but remains patient and friendly regardless.
العشية يكون بالكاد يعني يكون باع شبيعة ثنين العشية يصبح شوية مع الروس هكا هو العشية الحمد لله كل نهار وقسمه كل يوم وكيفاش إن شاء الله اللي جاي إن شاء الله اللي جاي أحسن إن شاء الله اللي جاي أحسن هذاك هو.
Since the attack in Sousse, security measures have been increased everywhere. Twice as many policemen and private security forces guard the beaches and control important road crossings. The drives and entrances to hotels are watched meticulously. The higher the security levels at the hotels, the more bookings they receive. All the large hotels have ramped up, trained and employed security forces. Mahdi Kantawi consults the hotels on security matters. On behalf of a company in Tunis, he examines whether enough metal detectors and cameras have been delivered and whether they are being implemented properly. The head of security of this hotel increased measures after the attack. He bought in metal detectors and increased the security officers from 15 to 22. It's not only the hotel's entrances and beaches which are under close guard, but also the entrance to the restaurant. 16 cameras survey every movement in the hotel. More are being installed on the beach.
Les choses ont beaucoup changé au niveau des directions générales des différents hôtels qui ont pris la décision suivante, c'est renforcer leur équipe de sécurité afin d'assurer donc le minimum de sécurité pour les touristes et pour les institutions, pour les hôtels en bord de mer.
Sunbathing under the gaze of hawkish security forces? Is this what we have to get used to?
Je pense aujourd'hui, les choses commencent à revenir, mais pas comme on le souhaite. Mais nous gardons espoir. Nous souhaitons que la situation devienne meilleure. Donc on assure une meilleure stabilité et un nombre important de clients, de touristes qui ont déjà la confiance et qui reviennent comme ils étaient avant.
The rapid measures to increase security were an important step for Tourist Minister Eloumi Rekik after the shock attack. Around 1/6 of 11 million Tunisians live off the income from foreign visitors.
Et nous avons mis en place des systèmes et des procédures de sécurité obligatoires dans les hôtels, dans les restaurants, sur les circuits touristiques, dans les aéroports. Maintenant, nous avons atteint un niveau de sécurité équivalent aux standards internationaux. Bien sûr, le risque zéro n'existe pas. On a vu ce qui s'est passé en France, à Bruxelles et aux États-Unis. Bon, mais heureusement pour nous, 2016, il y a eu une légère reprise.
Tunis is still the only capital in the Arab world where democracy has survived, although this freedom was accompanied by the economic crisis. After the unrest of the Arab Spring, tourism started to decline. The terror attacks severely worsened the situation. The unemployment rate is 15%. In the countryside, that rate rockets to 50% amongst young people. Mabrouka Kedir and Mahdi Kantawi, the journalist and the security advisor, are keeping a close eye on how the situation is developing. Despite the crisis, they consider the revolution to have been an improvement.
Voilà, nous sommes aujourd'hui, alhamdoulilah, donc quand même, il y a la liberté d'expression qui existe encore et nous sommes quand même capables de venir ici et de parler de tout ce qu'on veut sans avoir les oreilles derrière nous. C'est quand même un atout et j'espère qu'on va gagner encore d'autres résultats qui sont positifs.
This square in Tunis was where the demonstrators gathered in January 2011 in front of the Ministry of the Interior. The Tunisian revolution reaches a critical stage. Thousands are protesting against Ben Ali's rule, decades of autocratic government and self-enrichment. That was the start of the Arab Spring. The dictator has long fled the country. After several unstable governments, the country slowly seems to have been politically stabilizing since the last election in 2014. Mabrouka Kedir is meeting with journalist friends. She has to give an interview about the protests on the Kerkena Islands for an Arabic TV channel. In contrast to many of her colleagues, she doesn't only know the region's capital, but also its rural areas. She regularly reports on internal tensions in the country, tensions that are exacerbated by the lack of tourists. Reports such as these would previously have been severely censored.
Avant la Révolution, c'était très difficile de bouger comme une chaîne étrangère, puisque je suis la correspondante d'une chaîne étrangère. Mais aujourd'hui, je crois que nous sommes en train de vivre une certaine liberté d'expression et qui nous a permis d'aborder beaucoup de sujets. Aujourd'hui, je bouge facilement, je peux avoir ma permission pour des tournages facilement et je peux travailler facilement.
Mabruka is currently working on a report in the northwest of the country, where many people have no access to drinking water. The locals in this rural region are forced to rely on dirty water from a valley. Due to corruption, the local drinking water supply here has collapsed. The economic crisis aggravates grievances, as well as exacerbating the divide between rich and poor.
Je crois qu'il y a des gens à l'intérieur du pays qui souffrent et qui disent qu'ils ne sentent pas l'intérêt des gouvernements qui sont venus après la Révolution. Et c'est à partir de ces régions qu'on commence à se révolter, qu'on commence à faire des manifestations. Et c'est pour cela qu'on n'a pas vécu une vraie stabilité après la Révolution.
Civil unrest is particularly acute amongst the youth. In January 2016, in the city of Kasserine in central Tunisia, high unemployment and people seeing no future for themselves resulted in protests. There were skirmishes with the police, ending with 2 people dead and many injured. Especially in the more remote regions, Salafist preachers in the chaos of the revolution recruited around 6,000 IS fighters for the fight against Assad in Syria. Professor Aliani Politik teaches at the university in Tunis. He's very familiar with the jihadist movement and terror groups within Tunisia.
Le gouvernement, à cette époque, ne contrôle pas les mosquées. Il laisse presque un tiers des mosquées tunisiennes, dont nous avions en Tunisie 5500 mosquées. C'est presque un tiers qui était sous contrôle des salafistes. Les islamistes ont multiplié la création de ces associations caritatives et à travers ces associations caritatives qui reçoivent de l'argent de quelques pays de Golfe, alors il y avait un grand recrutement des jeunes vers les pays comme la Syrie, comme la Libye. La personne qui peut recruter une personne djihadiste pour y aller en Syrie, il doit avoir $20,000. Donc, à cette époque, il y avait une compétition. Il y a même des gens qui recrutent 10 personnes. 10 personnes, c'est-à-dire $200,000. Donc, ça devient une industrie, le djihadisme.
The influence of IS terror propaganda and Salafist preachers is being actively countered by the Tunisian government. It controls the mosques and has revoked radical imams' rights to preach. Libya is 60 kilometers from Djerba. The military has reinforced 200 kilometers of the border to prevent the infiltration of IS terrorists from the neighboring country. In early March 2016, there was a major ambush. 30 IS terrorists got through to Tunisia and stormed the border town of Ben Gerdane. All attackers were shot. 48 people, including many security staff, were killed.
Peut-être le seul problème, c'est les cellules dormantes. Les cellules dormantes qui sont un peu nombreux et ce problème, on peut le résoudre à travers une bonne politique socio-économique. Le jour où il y aura une amélioration de cette situation socio-économique tunisienne, je pense qu'une bonne partie de ces sleep cells, de ces cellules dormantes, vont disparaître.
D'ailleurs, notre président cite toujours cette phrase et il dit « Les Tunisiens sont comme le roseau ». Le roseau, c'est une plante qui pousse à côté des rivières et quand il y a la tempête et le vent, le roseau se plie. Et ensuite, dès que la tempête passe, il se relève. Nous, donc, nous sommes debout maintenant et nous sommes en train de combattre ce phénomène. Comme tous les pays du monde, on finira par gagner.
Camel guide Saber Misbah is now resigned to waiting for his livelihood. Where once hundreds of tourists teemed along the steep steps of the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, now there is a vast emptiness. The camel tour to the other side of the pyramids was his and his family's income source for many years. After the unrest in Cairo in 2011, he had to use up his savings as tourism dwindled. Since then, nothing has been going well.
Maybe like 40% to 50%. بالعربي والانجلش شوي. اعتقد اللي هي الوقت حاليا بترفع فوق شوي احسن الوقت. في ناس كومبلين وفي ناس مش كومبلين. احنا عايزين ما فيش كومبلين خالص. some people يعني في ناس مشيوا وناس لا. يلا عشان نمشي. يلا.
The upheavals of the last years have had severe consequences for Sabr and for Egypt as a whole. 6 years ago, Cairo, with its 22 million inhabitants, became one of the most conflict-ridden areas in the world due to the Arab Spring. The result was a dearth of visitors that continues to this day. In 2011, in central Tahrir Square, the revolution began. The spark from Tunis had ignited Cairo. 15,000 demonstrators occupied the square, demanding democracy. Reviled President Mubarak was forced to step down by the masses. The first free election in the country's history saw the Muslim Brotherhood gain power in 2012. After only a year, there were more furious protests, followed by a fierce military coup against the Brotherhood and its followers. The army was said to have killed hundreds of demonstrators, including women and children. New elections in 2014 brought the commander-in-chief of the forces, Abd al-Fattah al-Sisi, to power with a huge majority. Since then, the military has ruled with an iron fist. Newspapers were closed down, journalists and critics were thrown into prison. Our camera team is followed by armed companions that do not let us out of their sight. The media as a whole is under surveillance. Egyptian publications are censored. The country is once again a police state. In the evening, we secretly meet the human rights activist Mozen Hassan, who won the Alternative Nobel Prize several months ago for her work in women's rights. She is one of the few who still dares to speak openly in front of the camera.
The public space is really closed based on different laws and regulations, but for civil society it's really hard. We are really on a crackdown that most of the organizations, including our organization and me personally, are accused of foreign funding, and supposedly this case could extend to life sentence. And at the same time, they are putting pressure generally on our existence. Most of us, in this case, who are the human rights defenders, are on travel ban, like me personally.
In the city center, where thousands of European tourists once visited the Chan El Chalili Bazaar, the largest market in Africa, it's only locals who make purchases, alongside a few tourists from neighboring countries. In the last year under Mubarak, around 15 million tourists flocked to the country by the Nile. Those numbers are now closer to 5 million. Zakaria Gonem misses the European and American tourists who would spend far more money than the locals.
لا يعني الساعة الأول الساعة كان تطور بالنسبة للأحداث اللي بتحصل في الدول العربية وهنا في أمريكا فبيحصل ركود بعد كده يعني في جود بزنس بإذن الله إن شاء الله بأمر الله. I wish إن شاء الله أتمنى.
In a back courtyard of the bazaar, he visits his suppliers. The craftsmen are also suffering due to the lull. Without the export market, they would have been forced to close. Since their youth, they have been working as silversmiths, specializing in the delicately finished jewelry. a tradition that is now in danger of dying out.
هو الأول كان كويس جدا، كنا بنعيش كويس وكنا بنيجي بعد حتى ما بتخلص شغلك هنا في المكان من كتر الشغل بتعمل شغل تاني لناس تانية. يعني أنا مثلا بمشي الساعة 8 بروح مقعد مع عم حسن مثلا في مكان تاني أشتغل مثلا 4-5 ساعات تاني فأعمل فلوس زيادة. إحنا كنا مثلا هنا في الورشة بنبقى 6 انفار 7 انفار، النهاردة 3 فيهم 2 كبار. فاهم؟
مفيش حد بيتعلم.
مفيش حد بيتعلم.
هتلاقي ناس نعلمها.
بتعلموا صغيرين.
لو عندك حد عايز تتعلم نعلمه.
مفيش شباب.
في حاجة. مفيش حاجة.
If customers continue to stay away, they will be the last experts of a dying craft. An Egyptian tradition is threatened with extinction. Minister Yahya Rashid refuses to regard this as a crisis. The tourism ministry prefers not to talk about the job losses.
I was in Paris last week, and one of the journalists came and said, it is more safe in Sharm el-Sheikh than in Nice. You know, and that is the fact of the matter. So, you know, it all depends on how you look at things. The message is clear. Egypt is safe by all measures, you know, and I don't want to address this to the German public or the French public because we're all on the same equation, all of us.
Just before sunset, Saber Misbah ends his day. He lives with his family of 8 and 15 further relatives and children in a narrow house not far from the pyramids. Saber's father was also a camel guide, but his sons have decided against a job in tourism. The only way the large family survived the years of crisis was by supporting each other. But all their savings have now been spent.
مولود هنا وعايش هنا ومتجوز هنا واولادي هنا وكله هنا. لما الثوره حصلت ما كانش فيه حاجه خالص ولا 10%. كويس الحمد لله، احسن الوقت يعني الحمد لله. يعني تقدر تعيش بس مش زي الاول يعني تعمل يعني ايه تعمل فلوس تاكل وتشرب، لكن ما تعرفش تعمل سيفر يعني ما تعرفش تشيل فلوس زي الاول يعني.
رحت المدرسه رمتني قفلتني
والله انا نتمنى ان الاوضاع تتحسن، بس في اللي احنا شايفينه حاليا للاسف مفيش تحسن، بس ان شاء الله كويس يعني، ان شاء الله في المستقبل هيبقى كويس يعني. المستقبل بقى هيبقى يعني الشباب اللي طالع الجيل الجاي، يعني احنا خلاص الموضوع بالنسبه لنا صعب شويه، لكن الجيل الجاي هو اللي ممكن ياخد فرصه احسن مننا. نتمنى اللي هو يطلع احسن مننا كمان.
Yet the breathtaking view of the pyramids remains, with or without tourists. Beach life at Sharm el-Sheikh, 500 kilometers from Cairo. The beaches along the Red Sea are empty. The hotels chronically underbooked. In October 2015, a Russian charter flight blows up above the Sinai. 224 people die. According to Moscow, there was a bomb on the plane. Tourist numbers to Egypt plummet. Only 6 months later, an Egypt air flight crashes into the Mediterranean. 66 people die. A further suspected terrorist attack. The consequences for Egyptian tourism are catastrophic, whether in Cairo or the Red Sea. 500 hotels are forced to close. Hotel director Franz Kielnhofer has never witnessed anything like it. The only reason the Sheraton can stay open is because it's part of a large chain.
wenn man es so leer sieht, es ist ein Trauerspiel. Es tut weh, es ist nicht gut. Wir haben ca. 420 Leute entlassen, die letzten 6 Monate. Mehr als 2/3. Und wie gesagt, wir versuchen jetzt das Personal, das wir jetzt haben, versuchen natürlich durchzuziehen. Wir schicken auch niemanden auf unbezahlten Urlaub, wir ziehen auch keine Gehälter ab. Das Leben ist schon hart genug für die Leute und wir wollen das Leben nicht noch härter machen. Also wir versuchen die Leute schon zu unterstützen, die bei uns arbeiten.
The shopping area of Sharm el-Sheikh used to have thousands of visitors. 2/3 of the sales staff have lost their jobs. Of the 900,000 hotel staff in Egypt, 600,000 of them have now lost their jobs. For the governor of the South Sinai region, General Khaled Fouda, the plane crashes are the worst thing that could have happened. From one day to the next, the region's entire economy was broken.
More than $3 billion. بليون. more. فتخيل ال$3 بليون دول يعني كنا ممكن نعمل بيهم ايه؟ كنا ممكن نعمل بيهم مدارس، كنا نعمل بيهم مستشفيات، كنا نخلق فرص عمل لاولادنا، صح؟ كنا نبني بيهم مساكن لابنائنا اللي هم قاعدين في العشوائيات، نبني بيهم مساكن. فكان يعني عقاب شديد جدا للدولة أو للمدينة إن السياحة ما تجيش المدينة. عقاب للمدينة وعقاب للدولة ومكافأة للإرهاب على فظاعته وعلى جرائمه.
The so-called Islamic State boasted that it smuggled a bomb aboard the Russian plane at Sharm el-Sheikh airport. The security standards were internationally condemned. We are filming with a hidden camera. Permission to film in the airport was denied. Security checks have been intensified, and every item of baggage is X-rayed and sealed.
كل الأجهزة الأمنية اللي جت وزارة المطار وكان لها اقتراح إحنا أخدنا بيه، كان لها مشكلة أو ملحوظة إحنا غطيناها. الكرة الآن في ملعب الدول اللي قطعتنا ومنعت السياحة إنها تيجي، إحنا عملنا اللي
Tourism become apparent. The visitors are more flexible and aren't as quickly taken in by the general fear. Some are here for the second and third time, even though they must now take longer flights as charter planes no longer fly directly. German tourists have been coming for many years.
Also ich wünsche euch einen schönen Tauchgang. Genießt's.
German Heidrun Bauderer has been running a well-known dive school in Dahab with her husband for 13 years.
Also klar, nochmal zur Erinnerung mit der Maske.
Those who don't dive can snorkel, but everyone needs to follow the rules. No touching, in order to preserve the coral.
Wir haben uns ja so individualisiert, eigentlich schon vor der Revolution, also weil es einfach unser Konzept ist, unsere Überzeugung, individuell zu arbeiten. Da hat man natürlich auch nicht ist man nicht auf so Massen angewiesen, im Gegenteil, sogar will sie ja eigentlich gar nicht da. Und hat dann einfach über die Jahre viele Stammgäste, die das einfach auch auf sich nehmen, dann auch, wenn es nicht so einfach ist, auf den Sinai zu fliegen.
The underwater world by the Red Sea is unique. The diversity of the coral landscapes only survives thanks to the strong protective measures that are in place to preserve it. The fact that there is no mass tourism is a great advantage for the diving in Dahab.
Ich kann wirklich sagen, wir haben uns hier immer sicher gefühlt und auch die ganzen Gäste, die jetzt trotzdem zu uns gekommen sind, die haben wirklich immer das auch total genossen und haben auch sich höchstens überlegt, warum haben wir uns Gedanken gemacht, hierher zu kommen. Also weil sie sich einfach hier sicher und wohl fühlt.
An hour's flight away is the city of Luxor by the Nile. Its historic monuments are world-renowned. Tourism here has collapsed completely. It was the most important income source for the majority of the population. Everyone was affected as family members lost their jobs. Since the 19th century, Luxor was a dream destination for culture tourists. But in this city with its great history, there are barely any Europeans to be seen. At least more visitors are coming from the Arabic countries, out of solidarity, it's said. The 4,000-year-old temple city of Karnak, 2 kilometers from Luxor, is the largest temple complex in Egypt and one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. Ahmed Noubi, head of the information department in Luxor, knows every relief and every column of the famous hall that was completed by Ramesses II. It pains him that terrorism has scared the guests away and that the monuments are decaying.
We were one of the ones who suffered a lot from terrorism. We can't forget the decade of terrorism in Egypt, which hit the tourism in Egypt very badly and ended by the massacre of Queen Hatshepsut in 1997.
The first major Islamist terror attack in Egypt was at the nearby Temple of Death. 58 holidaymakers were slaughtered, 36 Swiss, 4 Germans. The Islamist union Gamma al-Islamiyya was behind the attack. Since then, there have been several jihadi attacks of differing terrorist organizations against Egypt's secular military government. Security measures in Luxor have long since been tightened. When there was an attack 2 years ago, armed security forces were there immediately. Ahmed Noubi hopes that lovers of antiquity from Europe and America will return soon, as further excavations in Karnak somehow need to be financed.
This civilization, it belongs to the mankind, and all of us has to enjoy and to preserve and to make the reconstructions. Layers of civilization. The Greeks, when they came to Egypt, they took from the ancient Egyptians their philosophy, their medicine, their sciences, and then the European civilization was built upon the Greeks one for the Renaissance. Then the new American civilization, it's built upon the European civilization. So if you see...
It's all connected.
All connected back to Egypt.
Now the Chinese are discovering the World Heritage Site for themselves. Since their president visited Luxor in 2015, thousands are coming here and wandering peacefully around the ruins. There is hope for Luxor. But the cruise ships along the Nile have not yet managed to attract Chinese clientele. Of the former 260 hotel ships that cruised between Luxor and Aswan, only a dozen remain on the water. At least the felucca boatmen still have a little work. They are not wholly dependent on the tourists, as locals also reserve rides on board the traditional sailboats. Mahmoud Matar loves his job. The feluccas were already sailing along the Nile at the time of the pharaohs. Mahmoud is convinced they will still be here in thousands of years' time. But he regrets that business is not what it once was.
أهم حاجة هنا السياحة. إحنا الأقصر دي بلد السياحة تموت خالص يعني. هنا شغال كل على السياحة هنا. بازارات، فنادق، مراكب، شراعة، كل حاجة بتاع الخضار، بتاع البلاط، بتاع البوية، كل حاجة بيشتغل على السياحة هنا. لما فيش السياحة عمر ما هنشتغل إحنا هنا يعني. وإحنا عاوزين السياحة ترجع تاني زي الأول وأحسن من الأول يعني هنا. والأمن والأمان أهم حاجة عندنا هنا.
Mahmoud is lucky that he doesn't only depend on holidaymakers from the West. The Nile Plateau by Luxor is very fertile. Many here are self-sufficient.
كل واحد كم يعيش يعني. معايا أخويا الثاني معاه برضه لانش، هجيب الليل بيستلم اللانش ده الثاني. لو مفيش أنا أجي في النهار هو في الليل يعني. ومعايا واحد ثاني شغال إيه أجري، عامل أجري في الزرع وفي الزراعة وزي كده يعني. وزي كده معنا حتة أرض بنسترزق منها، حتة أرض يعني نزرعها طماطم، بطاطس، في نزرعها قمح يعني. أيام الموسم ده أيام القمح بنزرعها قمح زي كده، بنجي نحصدوه. وفي الصيف في الشتاء بنشيلوه زي ده ما أنت عارف القمح يعني من العيش وزي كده يعني.
the tourists will return. At least, that is what everyone hopes. For the majority of the population, the return of democracy is not as important as the desire for safety, something many feel is offered by a dictatorship. Istanbul and Turkey are also suffering under a volatile combination of instability, terrorism, and economic decline. In comparison to previous years, revenues from tourism have fallen by a third. The attack at the Blue Mosque in 2016 was only the first of a string of others which occurred that year. The IS bomber blew himself up in the middle of a German tourist group on the square between the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. 12 Germans died, 13 people were injured. At Ataturk Airport, at the end of June 2016, there was another attack. 3 terrorists, presumably IS, kill 41 people. In the entrance hall, one of the assassins opens fire with a Kalashnikov and detonates his explosive device. The 2 others also blow themselves up. 239 people are injured. Istanbul finds no peace. Only 2 weeks later, the country is shaken by an attempted coup. Parts of the military want to overthrow President Erdogan. The bloody coup kills 247 across the country, and more than 2,000 are injured. The preacher Fethullah Gulen and his Hizmet movement is said to be pulling the strings. The weeks and months that follow see President Erdogan's government striking back. Tens of thousands are arrested, not just Gulen supporters, but politicians of the opposition or of the HDP party, which is supported by the Kurds, are thrown into prison. At the end of October, the openly critical newspaper Cumhuriyet is the target of state oppression. The editor-in-chief and 12 other journalists are arrested. International condemnation of this new blow against freedom of expression grows louder. According to the Turkish Union of Journalists, around 170 media organizations have been closed down since the attempted coup. Only a few journalists, like the well-known author Ahmet Sik, still dare to openly criticize the government.
Yani 120'nin üzerinde gazeteci şu an tutuklanmış durumda. 15 Temmuz kalkışmasının ardından bu sayı katlandı. 40 civarındaydı. 3 katını geçti. İçlerinde tanıdığım arkadaşlarım var elbette, meslektaşlarım da var. Tam bir junta hükümetiyle karşı karşıya olduğumuz için her şeyi sorgusuz sualsiz yapılabiliyor, yapabilecek durumdalar ve yapıyorlar ve bu tartışma konusu bile edilemiyor.
Ahmet Sik has been arrested since giving this interview. He had a feeling that his name would be on a list.
Ben referansını dinden alan, hele ki bu din İslamiyet ise hiçbir politikacının demokrasiyle bağ kuramayacağını düşünüyorum. Çünkü İslamiyet demokrasiyle en çok çelişen din ve onun da dini araçsallaştırarak iktidar olan sağcı bir iktidar eliyle Türkiye fazlasıyla otoriterleşiyor. Giderek rejim diktatörsel özellikler gösteriyor. Bir Orta Doğu krallığına benziyor Türkiye. Hangi demokrasiden bahsediyoruz?
The square by the Hagia Sophia, empty. The world-famous Grand Bazaar is deserted. The terror attacks, the coup, and the ensuing state repression have scared off the tourists. Even Antalya, a popular holiday destination in autumn, is suffering from a drought in visitors. The bazaar in Antalya's old town is reminiscent of desolate Djerba and Cairo, yet chances of improvement are much lower here. Terror attacks in Turkey are not only increasing, but social conflicts are also on the rise. Ümit Aktuman represents workers of the tourism industry. He voices the hardship of those who have lost their jobs.
4'te 3'ü düşüşe maruz kaldı. Çünkü 600 bin çalışanın şimdi bu bölgede baktığımızda ise 150 bini ancak kendisine bir şekilde iş bulma imkanı sağlayabildi. Ancak bu iş bulması da Sürekli değil, 3 aylık, 5'er aylık, 4'er aylık kısa süreli çalışma süreleri var.
In the amphitheater in Aspendos, not far from Antalya, one hopes that at least the Russians will return, as Erdogan and Putin seem to be getting along with each other once again. At the waterfalls in Manavgat, a few Russians can be found, but they alone cannot make up for the missing Europeans. Even the all-inclusive hotels eastward of Antalya are only 30% full. Here, the one-sidedness of all-inclusive holidays is taking its revenge. Clients are booking because of the low prices, and a connection to the country and the locals was one never made by visitors. Umit Aktuman only has a small office in Antalya, even though he is in charge of the only union for all those who work in tourism. He believes the current crisis is reinforcing the mistakes made in the past.
Sabah 5.30. Her şey dahil sistemi bir kere öncelikle o ülkelerin, bize turist olarak gelen ülkelerin en ucuz işçi, en ucuz kısa tatil dönemlerini kullanabilecek olan kesimin buraya gelmesi ve ucuz tatil yaptığında da bir para bırakmaması bu ülkeye.
In his opinion, Turkey needs to concentrate more on individual tourism, focusing on small boutique hotels and expanding its cultural offering. Only if the relationship between the tourists, the region, and the country is nurtured will guests have the faith to return in times of crisis.
Türkiye turizmini kendi yaptığı yanlışlar ile bitirdi. Kendi yaptığı hatalı hem dış politika hem iç politikalardan, turizm politikalarının hatalarından bu hale düştü. Evet, kendi düşen ağlamaz burada çok güzel kullanılabilir.
Sultanahmet, the old town in Istanbul, is not a typical all-inclusive destination. It's sought out by those interested in the city and its culture. The head of the Union of Local Hotels, Ali Polat, had to close his boutique hotel to save costs and avoid bankruptcy. Concentrating on individual tourism did not save him. His anger is now directed at the Europeans.
Terörün bütün dünyada olduğunu Avrupalı çok iyi biliyor. Ama bizde olduğu zaman çok büyük şok yapıyorlar. Çok kötü reklamlar yapıyorlar. Terör terördür. Bizim Cumhurbaşkanımızın dediği gibi senin teröristin benim teröristim, senin terörün benim terörüm değil. Terör terördür.
Nasıl ya? İyi misin? Sağ olun Ali Bey. Siz nasılsınız?
Sağ olun. Ne yapıyorsunuz?
Çok şükür.
Ali Polat has strong contacts in Germany. He knows that it's not just a fear of terror attacks that is keeping the tourists away. The tourists are not coming because they do not agree with the wave of political repression after the failed coup. Many Turks are upset by this critique from Europe.
Türkiye'nin daha çok Avrupalı turist gelmesi için Türkiye gerekeni yapmıştır. Eğer Avrupalı bizi dost ülke olarak görüyorsa bu saatten sonra Avrupalının bize iyi niyetle yaklaşması lazım.
Ali Polat is too much of a businessman to let emotions get in the way. He is successfully nurturing his contacts to bus drivers that bring Arabic and Iranian tourists to his place. In order to become less dependent on Europe, a new business relationship with the East is also the strategy of the Turkish government, which is distancing itself ever more from Europe.
Benim iş yerlerim hepsi Avrupa'ya yönelikti. Avrupalılar, Amerikalılar bunlara yönelikti. Şimdi tamamen değiştirdim. Biraz önce görmüş olduğunuz İranlı grup, öğleden sonra Arap gruplar ve bunlara hitap ediyoruz. Yani o boşluğu böyle doldurmaya çalışıyoruz. Ayakta durmaya çalışıyoruz.
The chances of a revival of European tourism here are very low. Democracy is under threat. Social tensions are on the rise. This is evident from over a dozen Islamic and Kurdish terror attacks in just 1 year. In Egypt, people have gotten used to military rule again. Most people accept it as a necessary evil and believe that it will provide the safety needed to bring the tourists back.
Egypt has been the first tourism destination on earth, okay? And today, we're not saying anything new. We are saying that basically the Egyptian tourism deserves to be at the head of this industry.
Tunisia has taken the greatest steps to protect its tourists and the future of its own people. If the country remains democratic and the youth profit from it, a stable development will be possible.
Nous avons constaté la situation a amélioré un petit peu. Quand on fait la comparaison entre l'année dernière après l'attaque et aujourd'hui quand même, l'année dernière c'était vraiment vide. Maintenant, ça commence à bouger un petit peu.
For years, sun, beach and cost were the main considerations for going on holiday. Now, one more has been added to the list: the fear of terrorism. The time of carefree holidays are over.